Good afternoon and welcome to Engage Every Family, the Five Simple Principles. This is session 2 of a 5-part series where we're providing an overview of the book Engage Every Family that was written by Dr. Steven Constantino. So Dr. Steven Constantino was a teacher, principal, superintendent, an interim state superintendent, and he's now a professor at William and Mary College of Education. He is also providing online formats for learning around enhancing family engagement where teams can join or individuals can join. Information about that is available on my resource slide and on his website that's linked in there. So you'll see on the left-hand side of this slide an image of his second edition of the book, Engage Every Family. And on the right-hand side of this slide, you'll see his original logic model that depicts the 5 principles and that there is a process for enhancing systemic family engagement within your schools and individually. And I just want to point out from that graphic that he always emphasizes the need to start with culture. And we talked about culture in the last session. And today we'll be talking about communicating effectively and developing relationships. And in future sessions, we'll talk about the other principles. So I want to introduce myself. I'm Caroline Rossing. I am a family school partnerships coordinator at CESA 3 in Fenimore, Wisconsin. I work through a Department of Public Instruction funded project, WISPE, or Wisconsin Statewide Parent Educator Initiative. So I've included my email address as well as our WISPE website, and I encourage you to go on that website. We have a lot of information and resources around special education and family engagement. And also today, we're fortunate enough to have Lisa Allgard joining us. Lisa is the Regional Special Education Network Director at CESA 3 and has a lot of knowledge around many programs at CESA 3. So thank you, Lisa, for joining today. So I want to start off with some components that Constantino brings forward. 3 kind of major components to kind of build a foundation as you begin looking at family engagement. So the first one is to reflect on why families would choose your school. So think about if families truly had a choice as to where their children would receive an education, would they choose your district, your school, or your classroom? So if your answer to this is yes, then you must ask yourself the logical follow-up question. Why? Why would families choose your school or you as a teacher or your classroom? So what is so compelling about your product that a customer, being a family, would choose it over a growing list of options? So he asks those that are engaging with him or reading his book to think about that. And many times the answers that we hear are yes, I know of some families that would absolutely say, yes, I would choose your classroom, your district, your school. But there's also families that they're just not sure of. They don't know if they would choose their school. And that's where the need comes in to build relationships with each and every family to understand their needs as a family and what they are looking for in a school, in a classroom for their child. So that kind of leads me to this next component that he brings forward, considering and understanding family circumstances for each and every child, building that relationship with that family so that you understand the needs and strengths of that family. So we've all heard those phrases of those kids, that neighborhood, those parents. I know all about that family. I had the older brother in class. And what I'd ask you to think about, and what Dr. Constantino asked you to think about, is assumptions. What assumptions might you be holding about any specific students or families of those students? And challenging those assumptions. And you can challenge those assumptions by thinking about, what do I really know about that family? What do I know about their circumstances? Or what might I need to know more about and gain a greater understanding about regarding that family? So that's the second component he brings forward. And then the third is really working with the hard to reach. or they could be described as unreached families or disengaged families. And what Dr. Constantino brings forward is that we have labeled families hard to reach when they don't seem to conform to our perceptions of our standard communication protocols. However, they can be reached. It just takes knowing how and the willingness to make the necessary changes. So, looking at the school's communication protocols, how you're reaching out to families, how you're getting information from families, not only from that system-wide level, but also looking at a classroom level. How are you reaching out to your families? And is that really working for every family? Or do you need to look at what might work better? Rather than a phone call, would it be a face-to-face conversation? Rather than an email, would it be a text message or a phone call? And then also thinking about who they're comfortable with. Maybe there's someone else in the district or in your school that those families do communicate with, and they're comfortable communicating with that person and utilizing that person to be able to help facilitate communication between you and the family. But Constantino also goes on to talk about the fact that there could also be a need to find out what the negative catalyst for that disengagement is. You're not being able to reach that family. So really getting to know of any negative circumstances that may have occurred that are causing them to not engage with the school. And that again takes effective communication and building a relationship with the family to really get to know their needs, their strengths, their challenges. So thinking about those three components as foundational pieces as you move into enhancing your family engagement would be important. And as we talk today about communicating and building relationships, just keeping those three things in mind. So as I mentioned earlier, we are in session 2 where we're talking about communicate effectively and develop relationships. Last session, we talked about the first principle, which is a culture that engages every family. And in future sessions, we're going to be talking about building family efficacy, engaging every family in decision-making, and engaging the greater community. So those are Dr. Constantino's 5 principles. And I just wanted to bring forward a resource that you could start with if you're interested in doing this work. These are survey questions that you could utilize, and they're meant to align to the 5 principles so that you could get perceptions from staff, or you could do it individually as well, about where your school's current state is. So it hits on beliefs, values, communication, and connecting with those community partners as well. So it's a nice list of statements that can be utilized as a data piece as you begin looking at family engagement. So let's dive into Principle 2. Communicate effectively, build relationships. So Dr. Constantino brings forward this information. There is consistent evidence that effective communication and relationship development create environments in the schools that are welcoming, respectful, and conducive to family engagement. So this is when the school places an emphasis on effective two-way communication and with every family and stakeholder within the learning community, and seeks to develop relationships based on mutual trust. So I highlighted or bolded the emphasis on that two-way communication, every family and stakeholder, and that mutual trust piece. So then he goes on in his book to provide objectives, or kind of what does that look like? So his first one is the school creates and maintains a welcoming and respectful environment that is inviting, supportive, and encouraging to every family. So what does that mean? Well, one thing he brings forward is just signage. What does your signage look like, as you walk through your school or outside your school? And in this, he depicts on the left some things that may come across as more negative, like all visitors must report to the main office. The parking lot is only for staff and faculty, and your presence is being recorded. Rather than what he has on the right-hand side, like, welcome to our school. We're glad you are here. Please sign in at our main office this way. Which one would be more welcoming to maybe a new family coming to the school for the first time? Here, I'd also like to provide a resource to you. This is from Dr. Constantino in his book. And you could do like a walkthrough of your school and just take a look at different aspects of the school environment and document the present condition, what your desired outcomes really are for that, and then what steps you need to take to make a change. And these talk to and speak to different things of like the physical appearance of the building and the environment, as well as just the feel, right? The climate as you walk in. And of course, you could add on other things that you might think of as well that you'd like to take a closer look at as far as your welcoming environment. So his second object, oh, excuse me, part of that welcoming environment, excuse me, also is customer service. So he brings forward that includes the attitude of personnel and sending the message that we care, which means greeting people warmly with a caring attitude and a genuine smile, being good at what you do. When you're good at what you do, you're showing that you know your job's important and it's important to the families and students that attend your school. Modeling excellence always, showing again the importance of those students and how important that is to you. Follow through and trustworthiness. And we'll talk more about that as we talk about communication and relationships. But that word trust comes up again, right? And then sending the message that we care. Very important that we show that we really do care about you and your students. And here I've got a second welcoming environment document. This was adapted from Dr. Karen Mapp through Scholastic, and she titled this The Scavenger Hunt. Wispy has adapted this and added more items in. It's very similar to Dr. Constantino's, but it does get into more depth around some things at the end here that I bolded. Like there's a clear written process for resolving complaints and problems. The school ensures that all families know how to use it. The school does an annual survey of families to get their ideas about programs and policies. So they're doing outreach, they're asking, they're kind of elevating family voice. And the school staff ensure that families learn how the school system works and how to support their child's learning so that they understand how they can interact, right, with the school and the school system to be able to support their child. So that's another resource for you to be able to utilize. So that's about the environment. So now in his second objective, he speaks to, well, what else does this look like, right? So the school employs strategies that extend opportunities to develop relationships beyond the school walls so that every family can substantially contribute to the education of their child. So this can be done in a number of ways. I'm going to be talking about in just a couple minutes, like positive phone calls. I'm going to be talking about family school visits, similar to home visits. But it can also be things like just getting out in the community where the families are, where they typically um, move about and do things outside of school. And it could be things like volunteering at the library, attending the fire department's pancake breakfast, or attending any extracurricular activities that are occurring outside the school. So just thinking about ways that you can interact more with families outside of the school as they're going about their daily routines. He also, again, in this piece, brings up, Dr. Constantino brings up the role of trust again in relationships with families, saying that there can be no relationships without trust, or at least not positive relationships, right? Especially between home and school. And we know that that's so crucial to have that communication and that relationship so that families can support their child's learning at home. He also says that before they can come to you, before they will come to you, you must go to them. And this is kind of where we bring up these relational home visits as one way to build some trusting relationships. And I'm just going to go out to this resource quick. And I had mentioned this earlier about family school visits. This has been developed again by my project, WISPY. Family school partnership visits. We provide a free training and mentoring for educators to implement home visits, I guess home visits, right, with families. The reason we don't call it home visits is because we have found working with the national project parent-teacher home visits over the past 5 or so years that there are many families that don't necessarily want the educator to come into their home, and there are educators that don't feel comfortable going into families' homes either. So we really promote just a neutral site where everyone's comfortable, just to begin building a relationship, just learning about one another, not talking about academics or behavior or anything like that initially, um, but just getting to know one another and start building that positive relationship. So if you're interested in that at all, you could connect with me further regarding that. And then the last bullet point, to help establish trust, also consider the need to build families up so that they recognize their value. This is so important. Families don't always know how they can contribute to their child's education, that what they know, their knowledge and what they can do at home to support them can really be beneficial to their child's learning. So it's important for educators and others working with families to help establish that and help them recognize that value. And we'll be talking about that a little bit more as we move along here. And this actually does speak to it a little bit more. So we can and need to convince every family, regardless of their station or circumstances in life, that they have value and are truly needed to complete the circle of people that will successfully educate their children. They need to know that they are a part of that team, right? In supporting their children, and that perceived value and the us helping build up that value, understanding of value in families, that perceived value that they have will play a huge role in whether or not the relationships with them to support their children or the students will be fruitful. If they really see value in that relationship and really see value in engaging and supporting their child, it'll be much greater outcomes regarding that. Okay, so this is his third objective. Again, what does it look like? Communicating effectively is the message coming here in this third objective. The school ensures that healthy two-way communication is consistently maintained, a sense of caring to truly collaborate with every family exists, and as evidenced by numerous mechanisms to allow families to communicate easily and directly with the school. So being able to see it within your school and maybe even collect data around it, that you are, as a staff or an individual, really truly collaborating with families and that two-way communication is in place. I wanted to bring up this document. This comes from Dr. Constantino. He's identified a number of best practices around each of these principles and the objectives that he's identified under each principle. So this is just a resource for you to take a look at. As he did that, then our grant project, WISPE, also identified best practice examples in this document. You'll see that most of them, or many of them, are around students with IEPs because we are funded through special education. We primarily work with students and families around IEPs, but any of these would work for any student in the district. I just wanted to point out, because we are in principle or objective 2.3, his third objective about communication, that some of the things he brings forward is all staff in the school believe that two-way communication with families is essential, that two-way communication is regular, it's child-centered, and it provides strategies for home learning, and it provides evidence of success as well. And those things are shared with the family, that conferences are student-centered, and that families consistently report high satisfaction with the communication from their child's teacher, school, and school district. So I just wanted to point those out as his best practice examples in this document. So I said earlier I'd bring up a little bit and talk a little bit about positive phone calls. That's a great way to engage with families, begin building a relationship. I would add proactive to that, doing this early in the school year to establish some positive interaction with the family before you may have to talk to them about anything negative that might be occurring at school. And then this is also available to you, this positive phone calls document. Wispy just put together a little document about things to think of, how to kind of plan for a positive phone call and that type of thing. Dr. Constantino talks more to and speaks more to that hard to reach. We talked about that in the beginning of this presentation. And he talks more about working with those hard to reach, disengaged families. So his bullet points here are believing that reaching out to these families has value and is worth our time. Comes back to kind of your beliefs, the school's beliefs about that. Really embodying the ethic of caring about the families and showing that authentically. Keeping an open mind about the family. Again, not letting those assumptions creep in, but really getting to know the family and their circumstances, being sensitive to the needs of families, knowing that all families are unique and all have different needs, different strengths, different challenges, and then setting high expectations for that relationship building, really believing in it, that it can really be beneficial and you can really grow that relationship with the family. He also talks about communication with all families. So we talked about making those positive personal phone calls, and he talks about doing that on a regular basis. And my project Wispy talks about that too. Communication on an ongoing basis is very important. In the second bullet point, he talks about invite families to share their knowledge about their child and support them to be able to do so. That would be, that family school partnership visit is one way where you're really in a comfortable place. There's no pressure. It's a safe place for families to share what they know about their child. And again, you're being proactive and you're being positive. Being able to support them to be able to do so, that would be one strategy. Wispy has other strategies. Along with that positive phone call piece, we have a lot of different documents that can be used to gain information about families, their interests, their traditions, that type of thing. And then the third bullet point is use a home school communication system with the family that provides regular updates on student progress and follow up with families. So this homeschool communication, I think the important thing regarding that is working with the family to develop that. What works for the family, what works for the school, and coming to an agreement on what that's going to look like. But a really important piece, communicating back to the family. So on this slide, Dr. Constantino talks about, am I communicating or engaging? So we've got like the three different bullet points here. The first one being simple one-way communication, right? Sending out newsletters, sending out informational pieces to inform parents where you don't necessarily need any response back. But then there's moving into that two-way communication. So there's different reasons to engage in two-way communication. And this is where information is shared between two parties, in this case, the family and the school, where both of them are engaging in dialogue and where feedback is exchanged. So they're getting into some deeper dialogue about the situation. They're both learning from one another. And this too is an important aspect of beginning to build those relationships with families is if you have some effective two-way communication with them. And then there's the engagement piece, and that's what he's identifying here, communication versus engagement. So engagement is really that active engaging, right? There's an emotional involvement in that when you're really engaged, and there's a commitment involved too. So when you really begin engaging with the family, it's longer term, you're committed, there's that emotional involvement. And that's where you're really building that relationship. And what he's saying here is we can move the needle from that simple communication that might start as one way, may move into possibly two-way, or depending on the topic of the conversation or the communication, it would need to be that two-way. But we can move then to engagement with the family and eventually building that relationship, which can help to build up their value and their understanding of their value as an equal partner or partner in their child's education. Here I also had a document that is available to you, ideas for communicating with families. I won't open that up now based on the time, but know that's available to you. It's just outlined some things that um, you can try and think about when you're communicating with families. But I want to move into is today, um, we want to talk a little bit more about CESA 3 and the programs and supports that we have available that really help to build up families again, to recognize their value, to support their child, because we know that families are experts on their children. They understand how their child interacts at home and the community, how they function there. And as we look at the whole child, we really need their perspective and their information to be able to successfully support the child in school. And especially in these areas that I have highlighted here, which are programs available through CESA 3 and people supporting those programs in these areas of like special education or other concerns that the family might have about their child being school safety, mental health, trauma, alcohol or drug abuse, and then many other pupil services that are just available as well. It's even more important to be supporting and building that relationship with the family. So with that, I want to invite in Lisa Allgard. Again, Lisa is the Regional Special Education Network Director, and CESA 3 has a lot of experience and information and expertise in the area of special education as well as pupil services. So she's going to share a bit with us about what she'd like to bring forward, what she can offer, what CESA 3 can offer to help with this area of communicating and building relationships with families for student success. So, welcome, Lisa. Thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you, Caroline. And I just want to say I love Dr. Constantino's work. We did a book study through through WISPE a couple of years ago, and our area of special education and pupil services directors really appreciated that work. So I thought I would start by just saying, my role is to support district special education and pupil services administrators. That filters on down to the children, but I don't work directly with children and families. Pupil services, and so what's the difference between special ed and pupil services? I would say an easy way to look at it is pupil services is what districts provide for all their students. Underneath that big umbrella is the big camp that is special ed, but that's just one piece of it. It includes things like school counseling, nursing, psychology, and even social work. So that's just to kind of ground us before we move on. One of the things that we all believe within pupil services and in special education is that family engagement absolutely matters. It's the key predictor for success and wellness and independence for our students. And like Caroline mentioned, it's especially important for students with IEPs, but it does apply to all students. I think when there's that communication breakdown, and I really appreciated how you defined that simple one-way communication, which is sometimes important, right? We need to say, okay, here's the list of assemblies this week. We don't need to interact with somebody about that. But that two-way communication is where you build that relationship. And through doing both, I think that can lead to better family engagement because they feel welcome, they feel important, they feel like they matter. I think when there's a communication breakdown, a statistic that I'll share is that it can lead to a breakdown in support, not because anybody's intending on not providing the needed support, but without that communication, it's hard to manage all of it. And a statistic, it's a national one, is that only 58% of students with disabilities have their transition plan in place by age 16. In Wisconsin, we require the start of that to be at 14, and I think we're doing a pretty good job in Wisconsin, so we can feel good about that. But I think it's just an example, that statistic, of what's missing. Why are only 58% of our students nationally engaging in that transition planning? And I would wonder if that doesn't have something to do with the relationship the district has with the families. think one thing that we all believe at CESA 3.2 is that we really respect the family's expertise because they know their child best. They're the first people who met that child, so they do tend to know them best. And so to not access the information or the strategies that they know work just doesn't make sense. I think we also really believe on that whole child focus. And that includes things like mental health, identity, life skills. It's not just the academics. And I think that kind of describes that pupil services umbrella again as well. Um, it, and when we communicate with families, I think we try to encourage our districts to make sure that they do communicate in family friendly ways, maybe with visuals, translations, a lack of using jargon. Um, and making sure that we find out from our families what works best for them for communication, and then making sure that we're also following district policies so that um, we navigate it appropriately. I would say things like maybe we avoid Facebook Messenger unless the district has their own Facebook account and you're somehow working through that. I think you just want to be mindful of some of the technology methods, making sure that it lines up with district policy and that there's not a room or that there's not the blurring of lines between professional and personal communication. Another thing that we think about, especially with special ed, but certainly with all students, is families are juggling sometimes a lot of different systems. Sometimes it's the schools, it's healthcare, depending on what the needs of the child are, social security, because some of our students are eligible for SSI, DVR, which is the Department of Vocational Rehab. Sometimes there's counseling, sometimes there's county workers involved. So having to juggle all of that can be really, schools can come in at that place and say, we can help navigate all of that and help tie it together. And I know that there are programs available through the county. They call them community supported teams, I believe, the CST teams, where they do bring everybody together to get things that wrap around. Sometimes having all kinds of people at IEP meetings can be daunting and can interfere with maybe what the team needs to focus on. So sometimes maybe there are ways of including all of those people without having a room full of people. And those are the sort of things that we can support you in figuring out. How do you want to navigate that? There are referrals. So sometimes we make referrals to other agencies. One of the requirements in special ed is that we refer families to the Department of Vocational Rehab. And I have found it works best if we're not just sending them an email or even at the IEP meeting say, hey, contact DVR. Or worse, I've seen where people there's an application and just hand the parents, here's this application, fill it out and contact them. And it's not connected then. So I think when you do make those referrals, if you can make a connection in a different way than just saying, okay, parent, here's what you have to do now. Maybe we can help you fill out this application if you'd like. Do you want to sit down? Do you want to stay an extra 5 minutes and we can do that? Things like that, I think, are what we call warm handoffs. And I think families appreciate that, and it helps them feel welcome and engaged. And it also helps them to know that that they have a team of people who are working together for their child. And ultimately, it's for the success of that child. And sometimes communicating across those systems can be really helpful in that we can share some goals. We can work on the same things together just from different standpoints. So some districts have liaisons who provide that sort of coordination. Every plan a child has, which includes an IEP, we want to make sure that the family voice is included. In special ed, we're required to add the family engagement piece. There are questions that ask about that, describe the concerns the family has, describe the concerns the child has. And I think sometimes when we talk about families, it's easy to forget that we need to be including the child. They're a member of their own team, right? And they're a member of their own family. And then another question that we ask in every IEP is how will school staff engage parents in the education of their child? So that goes beyond that communication piece, but it certainly includes and can involve communication as well. So that's kind of that IEP piece. We do have some things coming up at CESA 3. There's a 4-part series through an AODA grant that is hopefully going to connect families, schools, and agencies to support student mental health and wellness. We have a statewide offering that's available to families and schools at little to no cost through the Supporting Neurodiverse Students program. Um, in the past, we've had every CESA has had a day-long workshop. Moving forward, starting next year, it's going to be regionally. So next year, CESA 3 is not going to host one, but we're going to be a part of a regional team. And it would potentially mean traveling to a different CESA for the workshop. I think some tips that might be helpful to staff is how can we work together this month to support Caroline? That could be a question we could ask the whole team. And that just gets everybody grounded and pointed in the right direction. I think some things that can be helpful to engage families also is to try to mirror some of the school routines at home. So if a student uses a visual schedule, for example, at school and it's successful, it could be really helpful for that school team to work with the family team to create a visual schedule that would work at home as well, especially for those things that they have to do in both places, put on their jacket, get ready to go, those kinds of things. Making sure that families know the language that you are using at school around expectations, and then they can maybe use the same language instead of confusing the child. So those are the sort of things that we think about with engagement that go beyond communication. We certainly in a communication would be making sure they know what mental health supports are available, for example. So those are some tips for staff. I think, some questions that might come up is how can we reach families who aren't responding or who seem to us to be disengaged? I think that's where you want to try things like different communication methods. For some people, a phone call is better than an email. For some people, a home visit would not make sense, but they'd be willing to meet at a coffee shop. I've noticed with special ed, ever since the pandemic, where districts increased the use of Zoom meetings for IEPs, for some families, we're seeing more engagement because that works better for them than coming into the school for the meeting. So making sure that we remain open, and yet we obviously have to stay within the lines. Making sure that we connect the family with a person that they might trust. And just always considering what those barriers are that families might have for school. And with that, I think I have probably told you everything I can think of. I don't know if you have any questions, you can feel free to reach out to me and I'd be happy to answer them. Caroline, do you have anything I missed or anything you wanted me to follow up on?
I want to thank you, Lisa, because you gave a lot of great examples from what I spoke of about what Dr. Constantino had in the book and kind of what that looks like, in real practice and real examples that you'd provide and support families, educators, staff, other professionals with. Um, because as we think about those families, where some of those families are going to be lifelong supporters of their children, depending on their children's needs, and how important it is for us when we have the time available now with those families to build them up as much as possible so that they're able to support their child. I really liked when you talked about that warm transfer rather than just giving them a phone number for an agency, right? To show that we're all collaborating, we're all working together. because there can be, like you said, multiple agencies and multiple pieces. I think about a special education IEP, right? All those different phases of it and all that information that both families and schools need to be communicating on that's so important. Um, and I think you and I were talking earlier and talked a bit about that, and you brought it up, that family engagement prompt. That's another resource for anyone, as well as WISPE has provided examples. The family engagement prompt is within the IEP forms. So when you're developing an IEP, that's part of it. And it really is about how will the school support the family to be able to support their child's learning at home or, between home and school, that kind of thing, so that you can build up their capacity to better support their child. Um, but all as Lisa and I were talking about this earlier, and we'd gotten some input from other people at CESA 3 as well. And the one thing that really stood out to me that as we strengthen and as we build communication and build relationships and strengthen those bonds between schools and families to support students, we're really strengthening communities. This reaches further than just the school. We are supporting the family to support the child, and in doing that, really supporting and strengthening communities. So I want to thank you so much for joining us today, Lisa. I'd also like to introduce Matt. So Matt is on with us, Matt Renwick. He's going to be joining me in for the session 4 for Principle 4 of engaging families in decision making, and he's got some fantastic experiences working with families around their engagement with the school and being included in some decision making and that type of thing. So welcome, Matt. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Carolyn. Thanks, Lisa. Well done.
All right. With that, I just have a few more slides. I see we're getting close to time, really close to time. But some points to ponder from Dr. Steven Constantino. He goes on to say that a key ingredient in building relationships with families is understanding the importance of communication and conversations that are open, honest, and a true exchange of ideas. One-sided conversations, talking without listening, and we know listening is important, right? Talking down to parents and maybe not meaning to do that, but it can come across that way, or simply putting everything in an email are surefire ways to destroy relationships or never build them in the first place. So here again, I have a number of um, resources. I'd like to bring up this expansive listening. This is really thinking about how do we listen, and you can utilize this and look at the different ways that we listen. And you can actually do a little reflection of your own there and think about how you may be able to listen better and more expansively. Communication tips is similar to the other communication document that I didn't bring up earlier, just some simple ideas around effective communication. This one is tips for educators and for parents. And then this two-way communication worksheet, Dr. Constantino brings forth this idea of communicating with purpose, and he's identified the different areas um, aligned to the word purpose. So personalized, understood, relational, or building upon the relationship between the home and the school, positive, ongoing, safe, a place where both the school personnel and the family feel safe about talking about things, and then effective. So that's another document that he brings forward. There are also some strategies here. You might find some other strategies that you would use, but he brought forward some examples as well. And then as we move on, just as he speaks in his book and talks about family engagement, it's not optional. Thinking about family engagement in your school or district, what do you want this to look like, feel like? What are you willing to do to get what you want? He also says you gotta wanna. Your personal desire to make a difficult change, or really any change, right, starts with a very simple notion that the change is something you desire. So you have to want to make a change. You have to want to engage families differently. And then he talks about the need for leadership. Leadership that is strong, committed, courageous is essential to long-term success or systemic change in family engagement in a district. Certainly, you as an individual could change the way you engage families, in your classroom. But from a systemic, systems-wide change, he's saying that leadership is needed to acknowledge that change has to happen, having the will to make the change, facing and overcoming fear of the unknown, and creating conditions for engagement. And I guess you could say those 4 bullet points would apply too to you personally within the classroom. And then just what are your next steps? You could contact me for more information. You could take what you've learned here, and talk to others in your district or others you work with. You could actually review some district family engagement data. We talked more about that data in session 1. So if you're interested in learning more about that, we'll have all these recordings posted. Um, but you can actually take a look at data and disaggregate it and analyze your family engagement data. You can buy the book, Engage Every Family, and share that, or you could review Dr. Steven Constantino's website information, which is on my resource slide here, among other things. The second bullet point, that practical application for classroom teachers, is a great document that he developed. This was available for those attending, a short exit ticket, but I wanted to talk a bit about the next session that's coming up on Tuesday. That would be May 8th, or excuse me, May 6th on Tuesday. We're going to be covering Principle 3, Build Family Efficacy. So that's where families are recognized as essential members of the learning team for each student. Their participation is welcomed, valued, and encouraged by the school. The school understands that families are important and influential resources because they know their children best. We talked about that a little bit today. So with that, if there are no questions, again, thank you for listening in to this Principle 2, Communicating Effectively and Developing Relationships session.